And as we continue to cover this story, I just wanted to open this up to the panel. We have Jamie Rubin at the table. Our panel, will Cain jump in?
Yeah, I wanted to ask Jamie a question, return to something both you and Tori Clark mentioned. We know a couple things. We know this took place on 9/11. We know that this offensive movie that supposedly is the catalyst for these protests came out months ago, I believe, on YouTube, sometime in June, July. Tori Clark mentioned that she sees it as an incredible coincidence, and you said we should look into how planned this is. That's a surprise to me. Does this look like something to you that is not a natural kind of grassroots protest, but it's actually planned and coordinated behind the scenes?
Well, it is look a little bit that way, because think about it. The last time this terrible pastor in Florida, this guy who seems to enjoy burning Korans and stirring up trouble, got involved. Thank you for the name. It was Afghanistan and Pakistan that had the connection. And so clearly there were people in those two countries who reacted to just the idea of the burning of the Quran. And what I'm guessing happened is that behind the scenes, Islamist extremists probably heard about this event and are looking to create a name for themselves, looking to create an event. And so they find what they can. They distribute information that's now this film has been, broadcast on parts of Egyptian television, and stir it up by disseminating the fact of this film. And so then that is still, we don't know that that's violent yet. That is public protest at stage one. And where this is particularly unusual, and why this investigation is so crucial, is the attack on the American ambassador with an RPG looks like an assassination.
During his escape from the
embassy. And so what the connection between those two things I just described is the essence of whether these are larger forces at work, whether these are just the fact that Libya and Egypt are no longer under control of security apparatuses the way they were under Mubarak and Gaddafi, or whether there is some larger goal and some group and a conspiracy, essentially.
So I have a question for you, too. Is this just a clash between people who are very comfortable with open news systems being completely connected and people who don't know how to do that today? And we can't put a stop on that. I mean, the whole world is connected. These things get out there.
Well, finding this balance, and you can see it's already causing some political problems at home, finding the balance between defending free speech and condemning particularly hateful speech. We know there are limits to free speech, the classic being you can't yell fire in a movie theater. So figuring out how hateful speech is treated by our government so that people around the world don't see in an unsophisticated way something coming out in America and thinking, well, the U.S. government could have stopped that, when we can't stop that. And so, therefore, the only antidote is to make clear that we condemn hateful speech while recognizing the right to free speech. We can defend somebody's right to speak and still hate what he says. And that subtlety is tricky in the modern world.
I have to ask you about retaliation, obviously, because Americans are sitting out there saying, how do we respond? And so I want you to speak to that, but also as a former State Department official, how do you also deal with the balance of trying to support very fragile governments and folks who we said we have your back when it comes to democracy as well? That's very fragile.
I don't think unless we find the individual cell responsible for assassinating the ambassador. If we do find them, they should either be brought to justice in a criminal sense, or there should be military action of some kind, perhaps special forces tracking them down. They've killed the representative individual of our country. This is a serious thing. It hasn't happened, I think we were talking earlier, since the late 70s, where a U.S. ambassador has been killed in the line of duty.
This is a very hostile act.
This is a very hostile act. So some response of a significant nature is absolutely required. But you were talking earlier, and I think we all know the truth, and I think you were talking, Libya was a big deal in this country. We all spent a lot of time talking about it. It was nonstop coverage. We were all very proud of the end of the Gaddafi regime, a hateful dictator who had killed Americans in the Lockerbie bombing, who was about to slaughter his own people. And the United States, along with Britain and France, helped the Libyan rebels overthrow him. We didn't do it for them, but we helped them. And then, as it is in this country, we turned the channel. We switched the lens. We stopped paying attention. And when we engage ourselves militarily, and there are fundamental changes in regimes around the world, I believe we have a responsibility to see it through, and that costs money.
But wasn't that
costs
precisely
time.
what Ambassador Stevens was there in Tripoli
exactly,
trying to do?
But I can assure you that he was having a tough time getting the attention of our political system for providing the funds, the energy, the focus, and the attention that they needed, because it really wasn't so much money. Libya is an oil-rich country, but they needed help at a fundamental level from all over the world. They had no government system other than the dictatorship of Gaddafi, and suddenly they were free, and that is why they're so unstable that people can run around targeting the American ambassador, even though the government apologizes.
And let me just broaden this conversation out, and I want to bring in Elise Labott, who has incredible sources with the State Department. And Elise, as we continue to talk about Ambassador Stevens, let's also remember that there were 3 other workers with him in this car.
2 Marines,
Right, who were killed. We have the statement. I know you have the statement from Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Tell me a little bit more about, we have another name, Sean Smith. Who was Sean Smith?
Well, Sean Smith was a Foreign Service officer at the State Department. I didn't know him as well as I knew Chris Stevens. But, Brooke, I mean, Secretary Clinton often says that diplomats are on the front lines of U.S. foreign diplomacy. And as in this case, really, these type of people, these people that go to Libya, that go to Iraq, Afghanistan, these are people that, you know, a lot of people now in today's Foreign Service don't necessarily want to be pinstripe diplomats, as Jamie well knows. They want to go out in the field. They want to be working with the people, trying to, even if it means putting themselves in harm's way, it means getting their hands dirty and working on doing the hard slog of trying to build these institutions, trying to work with people on the ground. And these diplomats were not just people that sat in their ivory tower in the embassy or the consulate. They were out in the field working with various groups, working with tribes, working with all of the people in the Libyan government and in the U.S. government to try and get this country back on its feet and start anew.
Do we know, Elise, and forgive me for a bit of a morbid question at this early hour, but I mean, from what we know, Ambassador Stevens and these 3 other workers are still in Libya, correct? I mean, how does the U.S. then remove them so we can bring them home and honor them amid the violence there?
Well, we understand from one of our contractors on the ground that the bodies are being brought to the airport in Benghazi. Ultimately, they'll be flown home for proper burial by their families, and certainly there'll be ceremonies and memorials to mark their work at the State Department. There's a wall on the headquarters of the State Department here in Washington. It's called Foggy Bottom headquarters. There's a wall of all the Foreign Service officers killed in action. And unfortunately, in the last several years, particularly since 9/11, that has grown considerably, that wall. And those names will be on there. There'll be some kind of ceremony. But getting the bodies home, getting their remains to their families and their personal effects to their families, and really helping the families through this time will be a priority. And as we've been talking about, also trying to secure other U.S. personnel, not just in Libya, but in the region.
Right, as we learned from Barbara Starr, more reinforcements moving in.
We're covering the killing of Ambassador Chris Stevens in Libya by a rocket attack, apparently, along with 4 other members of the U.S. mission there. We will have more